In the last video, we talked a lot about, well, what happens if the income of a person or if the income of a consumer changes? What is that going to do to the consumption of goods? And that led us into the discussion of inferior goods and normal goods. And remember, the normal goods are ones that as income increases, you consume more of it. And the inferior goods are the ones where if you consume, or as income rises, you consume less of that good. And we were able to plot all of that down here, and we were talking about, well, income increases from $5 to $6 to $8. So that budget increases, that this budget increases, and what does that do to the level of consumption for hamburgers? If you remember, the level of consumption for hamburgers, as the budget rose, continuously went up. Whereas the level of consumption for tacos went up until we hit a budget of $6 and then actually fell as budget increased to $8. So we said that hamburgers throughout all of this was a normal good. But tacos, they were a normal good until a certain point, and then they become an inferior good. So what if we could continuously adjust this income? What if this income was adjusted or was varied continuously, and we recorded these consumer equilibrium choices like we have? We would plot a curve relating income to consumption of a good. And that curve would be at point A to point B to point C. So here's what we're doing. We're changing income and looking at the level of consumption. So we're relating this income to consumption and mapping it out. So what if we were to take those points and regraph them using the level of income and the level of consumption? We would get what is known as an Engel's curve. So these right here are the Engel curve, are the Engel curves for our two commodities. Now each commodity has its own Engel's curve or Engel curve. So let's dive into what an Engel curve looks like. So first off, over here on the y-axis we have income. Down on the x-axis we have burgers or quantity. So this particular chart, if we're going to look at just burgers, now remember each commodity has its own curve. So let's look at just burgers. Whenever the income was at $5, we consumed 2 burgers. As income actually rose, and income rose to say $6, we consumed 3 burgers. And as income rose to $8, we saw that consumption of burgers rose to $5. And at each time, the consumption of burgers continuously rose. So as income rises and consumption rises, we have a normal good. Now, what happened on tacos? Let's look at tacos, because tacos does something a little funny, a little funky. So this Engel curve for tacos, remember that we have income on this vertical axis, and tacos are the consumption or the quantity on this horizontal axis. So we had an income of $5. And we see that we consumed 5 tacos there. Now, income rises to $6. And we're actually consuming more tacos, so 5.5 tacos. But then all of a sudden, income rises to $8. We see that consumption actually falls back to a little over 4 tacos. Or actually, it falls right at 4 tacos. So what happens? At these lower level of income, as it went from 5 to 6, we had a normal good where income rose and quantity rose. Then as we go from $6 to $8 of income, we see an increase in our budget, but yet the amount that we consume actually falls. So any time that this Engel curve begins to slope backwards or is a downward sloping curve like it is right here, it is an inferior good. But as long as it is upward sloping or positively sloping, it is a normal good. So we talked about in the last video how a normal good could eventually turn into an inferior good. Well, that's what happened with tacos here. So anytime that Engel curve is upward sloping, it is a normal good. And if it's downward sloping, it is an inferior good. And another thing to note is that whenever we're dealing with normal goods or luxury goods, an increase in income leads to a rightward shift in the demand curve. So if you remember, we had our demand curve where we have quantity down here, price up here, and we have just a downward sloping demand curve. Anytime that we have an increase in income, and it is a luxury good, so let's say for hamburgers, that the income for hamburgers rose, and actually we are consuming more. So it's going to be a rightward shift of the demand curve, because we are going to be consuming more because of a higher income, even though prices didn't change. But if we have an inferior good, we're going to see a leftward shift in the demand curve. So we have price up here, quantity down here. We have our demand curve 1. And then as income rises, we actually consume less of that good. So as income goes up, we actually consume less regardless of the price. So it actually is a leftward shift of the demand curve. So I'm going to draw out D2 right there. And as an increase in income occurs, but if it is an inferior good, we're going to see a leftward shift in the demand curve. Something like steaks, for example, as income rises, would have a rightward shift in that demand curve. But ramen noodles, on the other hand, would be that leftward shift because they are historically known as an inferior good.